Chapter 259. Loop 1. Sweat trickled down the side of my face. My vision was blurry, the edges of the office bending and stretching out of shape. I forced myself to take slow, steady breaths, trying to calm the shaking in my chest, but it was easier said than done. My hand clutched at my shirt, pressing against the spot where the blade had pierced me. The pain still lingered in my mind. Hi. My breath continued to remain heavy as I leaned back against the chair. I struggled to keep myself composed. The pain, along with the image of my own death, clung stubbornly to my mind, threatening to consume me at any moment. I've looped back into the starting spot, just like the information said. Thankfully, I had seen and experienced my fair share of things. After a minute, I finally managed to steady myself, my gaze settling on the desk right where a certain lamp had appeared. I guess the system thought it through. I closed my eyes and recalled everything that had happened. Just like I thought, the killers inside the factory, stalking me, waiting for the right moment. I still don't know the exact rules or conditions of this mission, but from what I've gathered, he can't kill me right away. There's also blood scattered around, and I've seen multiple sets of footsteps. What does that even mean? I opened my eyes and felt my heartbeat quicken. This place. I wasn't the only person present. Are they part of the scenario, or are they people that entered the gate? This was a looping gate, where time moved at a much slower pace compared to the outside. I wasn't certain of the exact ratio, but I knew enough to be sure of that. The first squad hadn't even entered yet, which meant, if there really were people from the outside here, they would have entered long before me and been trapped inside for an unthinkably long time. Repeating the loop over and over again, without any success. Just the thought sent shivers down my spine. Would someone even be able to remain sane after dying for so long without any hope of leaving? I won't be like them, right? I swallowed quietly before slowly bringing myself to my feet. And right as I did, to talk, I heard an all too familiar knocking sound. My body froze for a split second as I turned my head in the direction of the door. It was just like last time. This was where it all began. I hesitated before walking towards the door. The pain of death still lingered in my mind as my chest throbbed. But at the same time, I didn't really have much of a choice. While time flowed more slowly here, it still flowed. I needed to get out of this place before the deadline with the conductor. No, even before that. I need to get out before the guild notices I'm gone. Things would get extremely messy if they started searching for me. They'd probably even brand me a scammer. Just thinking about the mess that would occur made my heart speed up. I really needed to find a way out of this place. Kriuk. I pulled the door open and stepped out, holding the lamp before me. Footsteps sprawled across the floor ahead, and the sharp scent of rust hit my nostrils. The darkness seemed to recoil from the lamp's dim blue glow, stretching weakly around the edges of the room. Looking around, my gaze fell on the steps I had previously followed. This time, I turned in a different direction. Since that one is a dead end, let's try a new path. Step asterisk. The echo of my steps rang again through the abandoned factory. Shadows from the towering machinery loomed on all sides, twisting into strange, sickly forms. I forced myself to ignore them, keeping my focus on the footsteps ahead. I moved through the silence, following the footsteps ahead, forcing myself to ignore the constant, unsettling sense of being watched. And then, different steps. I noticed a new pair of steps, one different in size from the normal ones. They were fresh and they moved ahead. I paused for a moment, then slowly pulled a mask from my bag and stared at it. The mask looked normal. It was just an empty white mask. But the moment I pressed it onto my face, it seemed to take on a life of its own, clinging to me as if it were alive. Long strips of red fabric hung from the top of the mask, each tipped with a small, jingling bell, and my vision began to narrow. Hi. Taking soft and steady breaths, I brought the lamp up and stepped forward. One couldn't be too careful. Hi. Heavy breaths echoed. A figure lunged through the darkness, his pale face catching the faint light coming from the shattered windows, eyes darting wildly. His hands swept over the rusted machinery, searching desperately for something to steady himself. I need to leave. A certain madness consumed his mind as he looked all over the place. How long had he been stuck in the loop? Moreland had forgotten. All he knew was that it had been a very long time. He had been part of the scouting team, tasked with entering the gate to uncover what lay beyond. But unlike most scouts, he was different. He belonged to the BUA and had received specialized training for exactly this kind of mission. He, alongside his team, they were all trained professionals who were supposed to be able to escape any gate. And yet, help, his voice cracked, immediately swallowed by the oppressive silence. He couldn't escape. He, along with his team, had been trapped inside the gate with no escape. Some had already succumbed to madness, wandering aimlessly through the endless corridors, waiting for death to find them. Moreland was the last one who had still managed to keep his sanity. But even he was on the verge of losing his mind. Help. He was desperate. He stumbled into yet another corridor, narrower than the last. The acrid scent of rust and decay burned in his nostrils. His lungs screamed for air, his legs trembled, and each step felt heavier than the one before. And then, a faint blue light glimmered ahead, piercing the darkness. Moreland froze on the spot, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the dim blue light in the distance. This was the first time he had ever seen the blue light as it slowly started to approach his direction. His heart sank, muscles locking as dread clawed through his chest. The light drew closer, pulsing faintly until it stopped, hanging in the air. The world grew eerily still as the light slowly lowered to reveal a jester. Its polished mask reflected the cold glow of the lamp, the bells at its tips jingling softly, each sound twisting through the silence that had swallowed the space. In that moment the two eyes met. The world stood still. And then, thump! Moreland's mind blanked as he passed out on the spot. I stared at the man passed out in front of me. I really didn't have any words. Before I even had the chance to speak to him, he passed out before my eyes. Am I really that scary? Holding the lamp as it swayed before my eyes, I thought of the mask on my face. Realization dawned on me rather quickly. In hindsight, I probably would have reacted the same. Nonetheless, bringing my lamp forward, I tried to get a better look at him. Under the dim blue light of the lamp, his pale face emerged before me. Short black hair, a thin nose, flaky and dried lips, but what caught me were the nail marks carved across his skin. They looked fresh, as if clawed into his flesh with desperation. Had he done this to himself, or had something else done it for him? I studied him carefully, then shifted my gaze to his clothes. He wore a crisp black suit, one that even put the ones I had to shame. Tilting his body slightly, I traced the lines of the fabric until my eyes landed on his breast pocket, where a golden symbol glimmered in the dim light. It was one depicting a monolith, and the moment I noticed it, I understood immediately where he came from. He's from the Bureau. I pulled the lamp back while staring at him. If he were from the Bureau, he was most likely one of the scouts that had been sent in advance in order to gain information about the gate. My expression changed subtly at the realization. While there did exist professional scouts, it was also true that a lot of the scouts sent were death row inmates. In this situation, this case, there's a possibility that not just one serial killer exists here, is there? The lamp in my hand trembled as I lifted it, its dim light crawling across the shadows around me. I moved it slowly, but a loud thumping echoed inside my mind, drowning the silence and sending a wave of tension rippling through my entire body. I could feel the atmosphere shift in that moment as I continued to look around. The temperature seemed to drop as I felt a certain gaze directed my way. My body tensed as I continued to move the lamp, searching for any sign of movement. All I saw were tall, jagged machines, their edges glowing faintly in the dim light, casting enormous, twisted shadows that writhed across the walls like living things. My breathing grew quicker, and as I looked around, I looked towards the footsteps on the floor. I traced them with my eyes as my gaze fell particularly towards a certain step. It was fresh, much fresher than the others. Following it instinctively, I slowly found myself turning around. I raised the lamp. A figure stood before me, a blank mask hiding its face, half its body swallowed in the lamp's dim glow. The hair on my body rose as our gazes met. But then, Haya! A scream ripped through the distance, its echo bouncing off the walls and filling the entire factory with a bone-chilling roar. Before I could even process the situation, the world around me changed. My vision blurred, and darkness swallowed everything around me. When I finally regained my bearings, I was back in my office. Why? Sweat ran down the side of my face as I yanked the mask away and scanned my surroundings. What's going on? Why am I back here? This didn't make sense at all. How was it possible for the loop to restart? The killer was right before. He was. Wait. I suddenly paused, a certain thought crossing my mind as I covered my mouth and slowly sat back down in my seat. What if it doesn't just have to be the killer that kills? I swallowed nervously. I'm not the only one who is within this loop. In fact, based on what I've seen so far, there are other people too, and they don't all belong to the scenario. In that case, does the loop restart whenever someone dies? In that case, the memory of that heart-wrenching scream, echoing through the factory, slammed into me, and I covered my mouth with even more force. There's more than one killer. And the killer wasn't someone who belonged to the scenario. It was very likely one of the death row inmates. Haha. My heart sank at the thought. Wasn't the scenario supposed to have been adjusted based on my strength? Why did it feel like it had gotten harder than it was supposed to be? Biting my nails, I remained seated on my seat while sorting through the entire situation. The goal of the entire scenario was easy. It was to find the exit and leave. A serial killer existed, and its job was to hunt me or anyone within the scenario down and kill them before we reached the exit. The moment someone died, the scenario would restart. So long as one person dies, the entire loop restarts, and a death row inmate has started to kill the other scouts. I bit my lips. This entire scenario was messed up. One serial killer was already incredibly annoying to deal with, but now there wasn't just one. Covering my face, I pulled out all the items from my bag and looked at them. As I did, my gaze fell on a certain item. Using this should be a no-brainer. I picked up the compass and tilted it slightly. The northern arrow quivered, then slowly swung toward the door, as if guiding me. With this, I should be able to find the exit. I had avoided using the compass before, hopping to get a better sense of the scenario. Now that I understood, it was time to put it to use. If just one person dies and the loop restarts, it should also be true that if one person leaves, the entire scenario is cleared, right? I stood up from my seat to talk, and right in cue, a knock sounded from the door. Holding onto the compass with one hand and the knife with the other, I decided to head out. Due to the nature of the lamp and how it attracted the serial killer, I decided not to use it for this round. In the previous 2 rounds, the serial killer had found me both times because of the lamp. Leaving it behind this time might give me a better chance of staying hidden. The darkness was also not a problem since I had my phone with me. It served as enough light to show me the compass as I followed the arrow. According to the description of the compass, it would lead me to my desired destination. In this case, it was the exit. I moved towards a path that I hadn't taken before. Tap, tap. Within the silence around me, the echo of the steps felt louder than ever as my heart drummed loudly within my mind. I tried my best to ignore my rapidly beating heart as I navigated through the maze of the factory. Eventually, I reached a door and pushed it open. Inside was a huge room. Twisted conveyor belts hung from above, chains dangling like sharp teeth. The floor was broken and shadows moved in the corners. I kept going, following the faint glow of my phone alongside the compass. I should be going in the right direction. I kept moving in the silence, every sound sharpened in my mind. The faint creak of old machines, the drip of water from the damp air, and even my own footsteps echoed loudly around me. Even the smell of rust hit me stronger as I turned slowly. Clank. There. A loud sound jerked my gaze from the compass. I turned my head toward it, every nerve on edge. Swoosh, swoosh. My eyes froze on the chains hanging from above. A few shifted on their own, moving as I watched, as if an invisible wind was brushing against them. A certain cold crept over me as I kept my eyes on the swaying chains. And my body slowly tensed. Someone is here. I could feel it. My nerves were screaming at me. My grip over the knife tightened as a long and tall shadow appeared next to me. Holding onto the knife, I stared at the compass once more. Step asterisk. I took a step forward. Swoosh. The moment I did, the chains above dangled with even more force. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of rapid steps. Heading towards me. Vast. A shadow burst from the darkness behind me, moving with impossible speed. My heart slammed against my ribs as I turned around, and a figure came into view. It was right before me. I didn't have enough time to react as I felt it reach me. But right as it was about to attack, a shadow appeared before it and clung to its body. Now! I didn't waste a second and slashed down with my knife. Spurred. Blood sprayed over me in that moment as I froze. And then, my vision grew dark. By the time I regained myself, I found myself back in the office. And it was there that I realized. I had just killed someone. I sat in silence while slowly replaying the events in my mind. Feeling the knife's subtle resistance as it sank into the killer's chest, and recalling the warm blood that splashed across my face, I remained silent. I had killed someone. This much became clear to me. Not the serial killer in the scenario, but an actual person. While they were probably alive again, it didn't change the fact that I had indeed killed them. And yet, besides the initial shock of the realization, I didn't feel very much. Is it because I've seen too much stuff, or is it because of other things? Yes, he was trying to kill me as well. I was just defending myself. I really did expect to feel more, but I was a lot more indifferent to it than I initially anticipated. Maybe it's because they don't really die, but even if they did truly die, I doubt I'd feel much. I didn't know how to feel about this. I was becoming more and more aware of the changes in my body. Not only would I get occasional moments when I lost my emotions, but now I was also starting to become indifferent to a lot of things. Was this due to the node in my head? I covered my mouth. I really need to figure out a way to heal my fracture. If things progress like this, I don't know what I'll become. The fracture was one thing, but the cognitive shard was also a big issue. If one was slowly changing me, then the other was outright killing me. Whatever the case is, for now, this isn't a bad thing. This gate was one where the mind was extremely important. It was a gate that broke the minds of anyone inside. This indifference, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it was probably for the best, as I felt that it was necessary in order for me to clear the gate. I stood up from my seat and took out the compass while also staring at the lamp in front of me. If the compass didn't lead me in the wrong direction last time, then so long as I follow the same path as before, I can look for the exit. There will most likely be someone waiting for me there. Whether it was the killer from before or the real serial killer, I wasn't sure, but I had to somehow manage to reach the area before anyone died. That's easier said than done. Each loop was slightly different. I didn't have a fixed time for when someone would die. I didn't even know how many people were present. This entire situation, it was incredibly complicated. To resolve this scenario, I had to find everyone present and make sure none of them died. The moment they died, the scenario would reset. I couldn't allow anyone to die. I felt a headache just thinking about it. I can just go around and ask, but will they even answer? I can try going as me, but given that they are scouts from the Bureau, I'd like to avoid that. In that case, I stopped for a moment and stared at the mask on the desk. It stared back at me as I slowly closed my eyes and took notice of my current state of mind. Do I have no choice but to go around pretending to be another anomaly? I sighed, feeling my head throb further. But at the same time, I realized that this was something that I had to do. In order to clear the scenario, I needed to truly become an anomaly. Just pretend to be another anomaly and scare them to the point where they'll reveal everything. I didn't know whether this was the best solution to the situation, but it was worth a try. And thus, grabbing onto the lamp, I headed for the door, trying my best to dispel any of the fear that I was currently feeling. Don't be scared, don't be scared, don't be scared. Tug tug. The knock came and I reached the door before stopping. Eventually, pulling the mask on my face, I pulled the door open. Kriak. Let's get this done before too much time passes. This can't be, this can't be, this can't be. Moreland hunched in the corner, clutching his head, his face pale and empty as memories of a previous loops flooded back. It wasn't supposed to be like this. There was only supposed to be one anomaly. Where did another one come from? The darkness embraced him from all directions. Moreland struggled to keep his head straight as despair started to take over his mind. The situation already felt like it was impossible to clear, and yet it had somehow gotten even worse. He desperately wanted to report the situation to the Bureau, but something was wrong with the gate. He couldn't find his way out at all. None of the items was working either. He knew that the Bureau had sent a few people to check up on them, but they had also probably encountered the same issue. I just have to resist until the guilds come. Just resist until then. Just. Step asterisk. Odea. The sudden sound of a step ripped Moreland from his thoughts, his face draining of color as panic gripped him. He froze, holding his breath, pressing himself against the machinery, and covering his mouth with trembling hands, desperate to remain hidden. But, step asterisk. As if aware of where he was, the step grew closer to him. Moreland's entire body stiffened. 1 step, 2 steps. 3 steps. The steps drew closer and closer, and Moreland's expression turned more and more desperate. That was until... Silence. The surroundings turned silent, and the sound of the steps stopped. A minute passed like this, as Moreland tried his best to keep his breathing even. Is it over? Did it pass? Can? A blue light suddenly flared before Moreland, his face twisting in shock as a white mask materialized, tiny bells chiming eerily with the jester's movements. Moreland's heart leaped out of his chest as he tried to react, but before he could do so, a dark figure appeared behind him and immobilized him. Moreland found himself unable to move at all as his face paled considerably, and sweat started to trickle down the side of his face. Slowly, the jester moved the lamp forward as their eyes eventually met. Eventually. How many? A cold, raspy voice cut through the air from the jester. The moment Moreland heard it, he felt as if he were being dragged to the ocean's deepest depths, icy fingers squeezing his body from every direction, suffocating him. He opened his mouth, but was totally breathless. While it was true that he was a scout, his job was just to scout things and escape at the briefest signs of danger. With all his tools not working, he was essentially no different than a normal person, hence why he couldn't hide his fear at all. How many? The jester's voice echoed out again, as Moreland was brought into a deeper, suffocating dread. Moreland didn't pass out like last time. Staring at the jester, whose mask was half brightened by the dim glow of the lamp, Moreland swallowed. How many? How many what? His mind scrambled to process the situation, struggling to grasp the jester's request. Before he could make sense of it, the jester spoke again. How many people here? Hearing the jester's voice once more, Moreland froze as his mind finally processed the question. How many people? It wants to know how many people. Why, for what reason? Opening his mouth, he tried to speak but found himself unable to say anything. In the end, he shook his head. He didn't know. And he didn't plan on telling. Why would he suddenly speak to an anomaly? The jester stared at Moreland in silence before pulling back. This surprised Moreland as he blinked his eyes in confusion. He was just going to leave him like this. But why would the Spurd UK? Something cold pressed against his chest as he looked down in horror, staring at the hand that stabbed right through his body. Moreland's expression twisted in that moment, and just before his vision grew black, the jester's voice reached his ears again. I'll find you again. I expect an appropriate answer. His vision grew dark shortly after that. Time reset, and Moreland found himself standing in the same spot he had found himself appearing hundreds of times in the past. Hi. His chest rose and fell with each ragged breath as his hand clutched at his chest, the lingering pain searing in his mind. Sweat streamed down his face, and the image of the jester kept replaying over and over. No, I need to hide. I need to hide until the guilds come. Moreland staggered through the abandoned factory, his eyes darting between broken machinery, rusted conveyor belts, and shadowed corners. Each creak of the floor beneath his feet made him flinch. He pressed himself against walls, sliding behind stacks of crates, trying to find a spot that could shield him from the jester's gaze. Here. He ducked into a narrow space between two towering machines, the darkness swallowing him almost completely. Just when he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. Step asterisk. The sound of a step echoed sharply through the cavernous factory. His body froze, every nerve screaming. No. The shadows around him seemed to stretch, pressing closer as if alive, and the metallic scent of rust mixed with his own panic. Soon, a dim blue light appeared, and a jester appeared. I found you. Hallelujah. A scream ripped through the surroundings. There are 11 people within the abandoned factory, of which 7 belong to the original team, with 4 belonging to an additional team that has been sent in order to rescue them. I sorted through all the information that I had managed to gather from the scout. Thanks to the compass, I was able to find him every time that I moved out. Although it says that there's a chance that I might be led in the wrong direction, for now, everything went well. I leaned back against my chair and placed the mask down. I was quite honestly tired. My body still worked, but the fatigue wasn't physical. It was more mental. Although I had yet to encounter the serial killer again, every time I left the office door, my nerves tightened to a point of discomfort. It wasn't the kind of fear that came and went. It lingered, stayed lodged deep inside my chest, and waited to explode at the first sign of danger. The serial killer wasn't the only person that I needed to worry about. In fact, the more time I spent here, the grimmer the situation became. This scenario was incredibly hard. So far from what I've managed to get, of all the scouts that are present, 5 are death row inmates. A few have gone astray and started killing the others, but nobody is sure of who. I rubbed the bottom of my chin, the stubble scraping against my fingertips. I really need to shave a bit. They don't have any means to communicate with each other, and apparently the roads continuously change with each reset for them. I stopped at the last point. This was the odd thing. Their paths continuously changed each time, but from what I'd managed to understand, it wasn't the case for me. The road was consistent each time. Is it because I entered through a different method, or is there another reason? I remained seated where I was, frowning while musing over the situation. The office, dimly lit by the overhead lights, was quiet aside from the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Dust lingered in the air, faintly visible in the beam of light. The chair creaked slightly whenever I shifted my weight, and each sound seemed to heighten in my mind. And then, to talk. The knock came. I pressed my hands against the arms of the chair and prepared to stand when I suddenly stopped. Suddenly, a thought occurred to me. Wait. I stared at the door. Instead of leaving like before, I remained where I was and sat back down. I had previously always left whenever someone knocked on the door. However, this time I remained still. Why was someone knocking? Who was knocking? From what I've managed to hear, everyone also spawned in a completely different area. I'm the only one who is in the office. Was there a reason for the knock? I continued to stare at the door as silence took over the surroundings. Tick-tick. The clock ticked. I continued to wait. A minute passed by like this. Nothing happened. The door remained shut while time continued to flow normally. The loop had yet to break. At least for now, everyone seems to be alive. Each loop was different, so I never bothered recording the time at which the loop restarted. I was just curious as to what would happen to the room if I remained in it. So far, nothing. Maybe I'm completely safe in this room. Clank. The handle of the door suddenly jerked downward, and my expression changed. I gripped the sides of the chair tightly, the worn leather digging into my palms as I continued to stare at the door. Clank, clank. The handle pulled a couple more times, each attempt stronger than the previous. I swallowed quietly, barely daring to breathe. Clank. The sound thundered through the office, rattling my chest. It was as if someone or something was trying to force its way inside. Clank. The attempt repeated, slower this time, dragging out the sound like nails against my spine. I stayed where I was, frozen, until the noise abruptly stopped. Silence. The pressure in the room felt heavier than before. Slowly, carefully, I stood up from my seat, each movement careful so the chair wouldn't creak. My eyes never left the door. I inched forward, my breath shallow, until I stood within reach of the handle. I didn't dare touch it. Exactly as I began to move closer, the handle stopped moving. The silence wrapped around me once again, pressing in from all directions. Holding my breath, I narrowed my eyes, staring at the handle as though my gaze alone could stop it from moving. Is it over? I didn't believe it for a second. I continued to wait, every muscle in my body tense. Bang! The sudden impact made the door shudder in its frame. My heart skipped a beat. Bang! The door smashed again, this time more powerfully than before as the frame shook further. Shit. I stumbled back, retreating toward the desk, my hand fumbling along its surface until it landed on the knife. I clutched it tightly before reaching for the mask with my other hand. I hastily put on the mask. Bang, bang. The door buckled with each blow, the wood groaning under the pressure. I could see that it wouldn't be long until the door shattered. I waited. Not yet, not yet. Bang. Waited for the next movement. And then, swoosh. I pulled the door open and slashed. Eck. A figure stumbled back, clutching their arm where I had grazed them. Their face, pale and drenched with fear, came into view. I froze at the sight. They did too, as their entire body started to tremble. In no way. They looked at me horrified, almost as if I had just torn away their last shred of hope. Their lips quivered as though the words had been forced out of them. I could see the sheer terror in their eye as they looked at me. I wanted to speak, but before I even had the chance. Step. The sound came from beyond the light that spilled from the office. My heart sank. I slowly lifted my head, gaze dragging toward the area around me. There, standing just at the edge of the darkness, a figure watched silently. My body froze. They stared straight at me. Step. They took a step forward, echoing down the surroundings. And then, from within the thin stream of light spilling through the crack of the office door, a figure emerged. Its presence was silent yet suffocating, the pale glow clinging to the white mask it wore, making the hollow eye sockets appear even darker. Like pits that swallowed everything they touched. Bah thump, bah thump. I felt the beat of my own heart, drumming loudly inside my mind. In no, oh my God. As if sensing the serial killer looming just behind, the scout before me began to panic, their face draining of all color. I thought I had found it. Is there no way out? How is this possible? No, 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 no. They held onto their heads as they had completely lost it. No, they had completely lost it. I could see it in their eyes. They were hazy and unfocused. The last shred of sanity was gone. Impossible. This gate is impossible. I clenched my teeth, pulling my gaze away from them. It was only 1 second, the time I spent looking at them, and yet, the moment I pulled my gaze back towards the masked man before me, I found him to be completely gone. When? A shadow detached itself from the darkness, and before I could even react, a figure loomed directly in front of me. Oh, there? A pair of cold hands clamped down around my neck, pressing with terrifying strength, and the air was wrenched from my lungs. My body twisted, but the grip only tightened, suffocating me completely. In that moment, all I could do was stare at the empty eyes that hid behind the mask. That cold and empty gaze. And then, crack, I heard the sound of bones breaking. The surroundings turned dark. I found myself back in the office again. Clank. I stood up from my chair as I felt the pain linger painfully in my neck. Haga. Holding onto my neck, I heavily gasped for air as sweat trickled down the side of my face. I stumbled around the desk and pulled the mask away as I took even heavier breaths before eventually calming my mind and thinking back to what had happened. There were still a few things that didn't make sense, but a lot of the things were now starting to make sense to me. Although I was still not extremely certain, I had a vague idea of the truth. This place. This office. It's the exit. Yes, the key to this loop was my office. It was just a theory, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt like it was the truth. The office. It was the exit. But wait. I suddenly took out the compass from my pocket and looked at it. I remembered using it before to help me find the exit. It led me to a place that wasn't my office. I pursed my lips while staring intently at the compass. The one time that I had used to find the exit, I found myself getting in contact with one of the death row inmates. This suddenly made me wonder, was the compass leading me to the exit, or was it leading me to the death row inmate? The compass has almost always guided me correctly, but the description did mention it could sometimes lead me astray. Now that I think about it, there's a strong chance this is exactly the situation it was warning me about. I felt a sudden chill while thinking about it. However, I was still uncertain of this. Holding the compass in my hands, I looked towards the door. Pressing my lips together, I was just about to move when, to talk, someone knocked on the door. I hesitated. That knock, who was it that was knocking? I knew for certain that it wasn't the same person as before. Since the route changed every time, it was highly improbable for them to be the ones knocking. Not only that, but every time I pulled the door open after I heard the knock, I'd be met with nobody. The more I thought about it, the more suspicious I felt. There was something that I was missing. Am I probably overthinking things, and this is just a part of the scenario, or is there more to it? I clutched the compass in my hands before finally walking towards the door and pulling it open. At the same time that I did, I closed my eyes and thought about my desire. I want to find the exit. I want to find the exit. Opening my eyes again, I stared at the compass in my hands. It was spinning in all directions. I couldn't discern where it was trying to guide me. I stood still like that until the arrow eventually stopped. It pointed towards a completely different direction than before. But that direction wasn't the office behind me. I felt my head throb. This was making things a lot more difficult for me. I wasn't sure if my previous conclusion was right or wrong. Still, it wasn't like there wasn't a way for me to find out. Holding onto the compass, I put on the mask and walked towards the darkness. This time I hadn't brought the lamp. The only thing in my hand was the compass, its faint glint barely visible in the dark. Each time I stepped into a new room of the abandoned factory, the arrow twitched, shifting ever so slightly, guiding me deeper inside. The silence pressed against my ears, broken only by the sound of my own footsteps. From time to time, the creak of rusted machinery echoed through the dark, followed by the faint clatter of chains dangling above, swaying just enough to make strange, uneven sounds in the silence. I ignored all the noise and just followed the arrow. I picked up the pace as I did. I don't know when someone will die. I need to hurry up. I need to. Tap. The sudden sound of a stop halted me on the spot. It came from a distance, and it was soft. I pressed myself against the side of a rusted machine, holding my breath as a small shadow drifted past the area I was in. Even with just a glance, I knew it was one of the scouts. Their movements were sluggish, their back unnaturally hunched. I couldn't make out their face, but the way they staggered forward told me enough. They looked hollow, empty, as if all sense of self had been stripped away. I waited for them to leave before carrying out my mission. Holding onto the compass, I picked up the pace and rushed towards wherever the arrow guided me. After a certain point, I didn't even bother hiding my presence. I just started running as fast as possible. I needed to get to the bottom of the compass. Where was the exit? Was it my office or somewhere else? I ran and ran and ran. I didn't know how long had passed, but with each second that ticked, I felt my anxiety grow. Any second now, any second. I could tell that the loop was going to restart any second now. But not yet. At least not until I found the exit. I tightened my grip on the compass and bolted forward with everything I had. Broken machinery, swaying chains, scattered boxes. I shoved past it all until, at last, a faint light flickered in the distance. There! My eyes lit up, and I picked up my pace. I had finally found the exit. I pushed past a few more pieces of machinery, running with all the strength I could muster, until I finally skidded to a halt. That's greeting me was my office. The light source was the faint glow spilling through the half-open door of the office. Staring at the compass in my hands, I closed my eyes and caught my breath. This pretty much confirmed it. The office was my exit. I smiled to myself before lowering my head and looking at the office. I just ran around in a circle, didn't I? It didn't really feel like I did. Perhaps I didn't, but it didn't matter. Now that I had confirmed that my office was the exit, the entire scenario had shifted in my head. The quest previously told me that I needed to find the exit in order to leave. I have found it. What am I supposed to do now? I covered my mouth and thought deeply about the situation. However, as I glanced around, I quickly realized this wasn't the place to dwell on it. Steadying myself, I slipped the compass into my pocket and returned to the office. My hand closed around the handle, pulling the door open, but the moment I stepped inside, my expression changed drastically. The office was a wreck. The desk lay overturned, papers strewn haphazardly across the floor. The painting had been knocked down, lying crooked beside the toppled fax machine. Every drawer gaped open, as if someone had torn through them in a frantic search for something. What just? Before I even had the time to figure out what had happened, I heard a scream pierce through the surroundings. Yuck. My vision grew dark shortly after that. By the time I regained myself, the office was back in order. I looked around in confusion until... Click! I heard a sudden clicking sound coming from the door. I slowly turned my head toward the sound and rose to my feet. Approaching the door, I pressed my hand against the cold handle and tried to pull it open, but... Clank, clank. Locked. It was locked. What the... Clank, clank. I pulled the handle down a couple of more times. However, regardless of what I did, the door remained locked. I stared at the door in silence before pulling away. Glancing back, I stepped into the room and hurriedly rifled through the drawers, heading straight for the one where I put the spare key to the office. I pulled it open and peered inside. Gone. The spare key. It was gone. Shit. I covered my mouth and stared at the door again. My heart pressed tightly against my chest as I looked at it. The situation was clear. Someone had entered my office while I was gone and taken the key. The most worrisome aspect was the fact that whoever took my key was able to bring it with them even after the loop reset. The first thought that came to my mind was, did a scout take the key? This felt like the most probable conclusion. While I was gone, they most likely ended up finding the office and entered it, hoping for it to be the exit. However, once they entered and realized that they were let out, they probably grew desperate and looked for something to help them leave. The key being the most probable item. It sounds plausible in theory, but... I took a deep breath while staring at the door. It's very likely not what happened. If it was truly one of the scouts, then the moment that time reset, they shouldn't have been able to lock the door. They should have been transported elsewhere. In conclusion, it was impossible for it to be a scout. The only one that could be responsible for this was the serial killer. Or the one who originally knocked on my door. Tick-tick. The tick of the clock continued to echo as I remained seated where I was, sorting through the entire situation in my mind. The more I thought about the situation, the more confused I became. Especially when... No one knocked on the door. I looked at the clock and then the door. Usually, the knock comes a minute into the scenario. The fact that I don't hear any knocking is worrying. This pointed to only one conclusion. The entity that normally knocked on my door at the beginning was almost certainly the culprit. Drumming my fingers against the table, I stood up and headed for the door. I reached for the handle and tried to pull once more. However, the door was thoroughly locked. I cursed before taking out my key. However, I cursed yet again when I stared at the handle. Fucking. The keyhole was blocked. Putting in the main key, I could feel that something was blocking the key from entering, and regardless of what I did, the key wouldn't budge. I didn't panic. Instead, I extended my finger, and a black film materialized, stretching into a long, slender rod. From that point, I tried pushing the thing that was blocking the keyhole. However, nothing. The thing blocking the door couldn't be moved at all. I frowned and moved back. At the same time, a long and slender finger appeared next to me as I nudged at the keyhole in front of me. Try going on the other side and seeing if you can get the door open. The Dreamwalker's figure slowly seemed to dissolve into the ground, slipping beneath the gap of the door. Although I couldn't see what it was seeing, I could feel its figure appear behind the door as it tried to reach for the handle. However, right as it reached for the door, it stopped. I didn't understand what was happening. However, something felt clearly wrong with the situation, as I felt something stir outside. Then, bang! The door rattled. My heart jumped as I looked at the door. Bang! The door rattled again, this time more powerfully. I stepped back, staring at the door in apprehension and confusion. What was happening? Wah! Lucky! A sharp, splitting pain tore through my head, and I clutched it as I stumbled backward. The agony pierced deep into my mind, forcing me to lean on the table for support while I drew deep, ragged breaths. By the time I recovered my breath, I realized what had happened. The Dreamwalker. It had been killed. Shit. I fixed my gaze on the door, feeling the walls and shadows around me begin to stretch as my heart pounded in my chest. The situation became clear to me in that moment. I couldn't leave. I was trapped. Whatever entity was standing outside, it was trying to keep me sealed in the room. Why is that? I pressed a hand to my lips as a flood of thoughts surged through me. The entity had always knocked before. Why had it suddenly stopped and locked me out? What had changed? What had? Something dawned on me. What had changed since the past? Realization. I now knew that the office was the exit. If before it wanted me to leave, it now wanted me to stay. Why? Because it understood that I had found the exit. And for what reason did it not want me to leave now that I had found the exit? It was clear to me now. It doesn't want me to help the others find the exit. Bah thump, bah thump. The key to clearing the scenario finally became clear to me. It wasn't about finding the exit. It was about getting everyone within the scenario to find the exit and leave together. This was how the scenario was cleared. Oh shit. I covered my face with both hands while sitting back down at my desk. It all finally clicked, yet at the same time, it felt as if the difficulty had spiked by several degrees. On top of that, I had no sense of how much time had passed in the real world. Maybe only a little, but it wouldn't be long before those in the guild realized I was missing. Just the thought gave me a headache. I need to quickly find a way to clear this scenario. Otherwise, by the time I manage to get out, everything will be a mess. But how? How exactly could I clear the scenario now that I had been locked into my own room with no way out? I ruffled my hair in annoyance while looking around. Somehow, I need to find a way to get everyone into the office. But if I can't get out, how am I supposed to do that? My head hurt just thinking about my situation. However, in the midst of my despair, my gaze couldn't help but lock towards the side of the room, right where a certain keyboard appeared. My mind paused. Wait. I stood up from my seat and walked towards the keyboard. Tracing my fingers across the key and turning it on, I looked back at the door. Bah thump. My heart raced again as I looked at the time. It can work, right? Dang. I played a random note on the keyboard. The sound was loud and sharp, and I paused after hearing it. Yes, this might work. The objective of the quest was supposedly to find the exit. However, I now understood that my office was the very same exit. Taking into consideration the fact that I couldn't leave my office, and that my office was the exit, the only way for me to clear the quest was by somehow getting everyone to find the exit. This was what was clear to me. However, given that going out seemed to be rather hard, the only way for me to get everyone to come to the exit was by making enough noise to attract them. And I had the perfect instrument for that. Who would have thought that things would turn out this way? I smiled before setting up the keyboard in front of the door. Going back to my desk and taking out a music sheet, I placed it on top of the piano. Sitting down on the keyboard stool, I placed my hands over the keys. The surroundings grew silent in that moment. Tick-tick. Save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I was suddenly reminded of the piece that I needed to play for the conductor and closed my eyes. Focus, I need to focus. I suddenly thought back to the lessons that I used to take. To my old teacher, Mrs. Clark. She was an old lady with graying hair and a soft smile. She would come to the orphanage every week to teach us the piano. Placing my hands on the keyboard just as she had taught me, I pressed down and let the first note resonate into the silence. Dang! The last time I had truly played the piano was back in Myers Gate. I tried to recall the sensation of playing the piano, the smooth glide of the keys beneath my fingers, and the rare clarity that settled in my head. However, dong! I flinched and stared at the key in front of me. The note was off. I didn't let that affect me as I continued again. Dang! I pressed the first key and began to follow the sheet in front of me. I was familiar with the notes and I followed them clearly, but dong! From time to time, I'd continue to mess up. Why? Taking a moment to pause, I looked at the keyboard in front of me. I knew that I was rusty. This much was clear to me. But it wasn't just that. The piece I needed to play wasn't normal. It was haunting in its tone, steeped in a tension that refused to let go. Each note was sharp, cutting through the air, and the tempo pressed forward with each note that played. I looked at the keyboard in front of me. At this moment, I forgot all about the scenario and everything that I needed to do. The only thing on my mind was the keyboard in front of me. Dang dang. I began to play the first two notes. It went well, but dong! By the time I reached the seventh note, I made a mistake. I tried again, but the result wasn't much different. Dong! I made a mistake once again. I didn't give up, I had time. Regardless, the only thing I could do was play. And that was exactly what I did. Dang dang dang. The rust started to shake off gradually. I started to play more smoothly, and the notes were starting to unfold before my very eyes. And yet, dang, no. I stopped and looked back at the keyboard. While everything was going smoothly, it still didn't feel right. Something about what I was doing felt wrong. Furthermore, turning my attention towards the door and seeing how nobody had knocked on it, I bit my lips. Is my plan going to work? At this rate, I might be stuck here for a very long time. I scratched the back of my head. No, I can't give up. I looked at the keyboard again and prepared to press on the key when my surroundings grew dark and everything reverted back to how it was before. I sat blankly on my chair before looking around me. All until... clicking. I heard the sound of the door locking, and I turned my attention towards it. Someone died, the loop reset. I swallowed quietly before taking a deep breath. I more or less expected the first trial to fail. However, the part that worried me was my current level. It's not possible. In the small amount of time I had spent, something became clear to me. I was not good enough. In order for me to reach a level where I could play properly, I'd need at least 10 years of proper practice. This was the bare minimum. While the loop did provide me with more time, the time was still not enough. Not enough. I ruffled the back of my head while feeling a certain sensation pierce my chest. It was a tickling yet rushed sensation that made my toes tingle. Biting my nails, I leaned back against the chair. Things can't keep going like this. I really need to think of a way to solve this. But how? How can I do that? I turned my attention towards the compass. I clutched it tightly and thought, point me where I can find a way to clear the conductor's trial. Just a clue, something. I was desperate. I stared at the compass anxiously as it started to spin under my request. The compass arrow spun faster and faster. I swallowed hard, my eyes locked on its frantic movement, anxiety tightening in my chest. Come on, come on. My legs tapped rapidly against the ground. Time ticked and the compass continued to spin. My heart sank at the sight. Waiting for several more minutes, I eventually gave up when I saw that the arrow wouldn't stop spinning. In the end, covering my mouth, I leaned back against my chair while blankly staring at the ceiling. I closed my eyes and thought deeply about my current situation. At my current level, I won't be able to do anything unless the loop continues for 10 years. The compass is also not working, meaning that the item that I need in order to beat the conductor isn't here. In that case, I need to quickly find a way to get out of this place in order to find that item. I already had an idea of what the item I needed was. I had already caught sight of it back when I was in the guild. That was the item that I needed in order to clear the bet. So long as I managed to press each key properly and didn't make any mistakes. Yes, I need to hurry up and get out of this place. I pressed my hand against the table and renewed my goal. I stood up, reaching for the keyboard when my eyes landed on a box at the far end of the room, one holding carefully chosen pieces of clothing. In that brief moment, as my gaze lingered on the items, something inside me clicked, and I blinked slowly, caught in sudden clarity. Wait! I moved towards the box and carefully took out each of the items. From the red wig to the shoes and the red ball. Staring at the items in my mind, I slowly set them down and shifted my gaze toward the corner of the room, where a familiar clown figure stood, its blank expression fixed on me. Do you think it's possible? The clown continued to stare blankly at me. I opened my mouth again to ask, but the clown soon nodded. I took a deep breath, feeling my heartbeat quicken. It's possible. I didn't let my emotions get to me. I looked at the clown again. How long will it take for me to be completely hypnotized? Do you think you can make it quickly? It usually took a bit of time to hypnotize someone. It took about a week to hypnotize the guy from the gaming studio. But even if it isn't quick, I guess I do have a lot of time. And as I looked at the clown, I saw it soon shake its head. So it's not possible. I closed my eyes in understanding. This wasn't the end of the world. Since I had time, I was fine with waiting a little bit. Okay. I stood up slowly and handed the items to the clown. Do it, I muttered, staring straight at the clown. Hypnotize me. Make it so that I never make a mistake while playing. Loop 1. I began to log everything in a diary. This will be the first loop since I'll try to hypnotize myself. I looked at the clown and the clown looked at me. Then, with a simple nod, I watched as the clown slowly rolled a red ball onto the floor. The moment I caught sight of the ball, I felt something within my mind stir. However, it was only for a brief moment before it faded. Picking up the ball, I squished it a couple of times before it faded completely from my sight. I guess I won't be able to use it from this point forward. I only had 2 tries. I had already used one in the past, and with this one used as well, I could no longer hypnotize anyone else. This was fine, however, if it helped me accomplish my goal. Let's get started. I sat down at the piano and began playing the notes again. Dang! There was no change from the previous round. Every few notes I'd make a mistake. The piece was simply not an easy one. Nonetheless, I didn't care and just continued to play. I continued like this until the loop reset. Loop 2. This loop wasn't much different from the first one. Click. The door locked a few seconds after I reappeared. Aside from that, almost everything else was the same. The only thing that changed was the item that Mr. Jingles showed me. It was a pair of white gloves. Let's try again. I sat on the chair and began playing the keyboard. Dang dang. Dong. Loop 3. Each loop lasted from 10 minutes to an hour. Click. I didn't even waste a second. Setting up the keyboard, I began playing the keyboard. Right as I began setting it up, however, my gaze paused on a certain red button as I tossed it to the side and began playing. I played while facing the door. And yet, staring at it, I couldn't help but grow less and less confident about my strategy. Did anyone truly hear my music? No, in the first place, was the other side soundproof? No, don't think about it. I shifted my attention towards the keyboard and began playing once again. Even though I planned on hypnotizing myself to play perfectly, I still wanted to practice and get familiar with the keyboard. That would also help with the hypnotization. Again. Dang dang. I continued to practice like this, waiting for someone to come, for some sort of sign that my method was working. But, Loop 7. Even as the 7th loop arrived, there was no change at all. In fact, unlike the last time, nobody came to my door. From the moment it was locked, nobody started bothering me anymore. I grew anxious, but at the same time I remained focused. Just bide your time, keep practicing and bide your time. Dang! I focused my entire attention on the piano sheet. Loop 8, Loop 9, Loop 10, Loop 11, Loop 12. No change occurred. I began to lose track of time. I had now wired myself to continue practicing the piano. Dang dang. The piano was all I did. Because of the loops, I didn't even feel tired. I'd be reset to a point where all my weariness and tiredness would disappear. Mentally, however, I started to become drained. But, dang, I continued. Loop 31. I had now fully lost track of time. I didn't know how long I had been stuck in the gate. I could feel myself growing numb to the concept of time. It was just a cycle at this point. A cycle that I didn't try to stop. Picking up the keyboard, I set it up again and began playing. The door remained silent. Nobody came to it. Nobody tried to open it. It was just me. Dang dang. Me and the piano. Loop 48. I had now reached a point where I wasn't making that many mistakes. And yet, the play was still far from perfect. Something felt missing. I couldn't quite tell what it was, but I was certain that something was missing. What I was playing was simply not good enough. I stopped and stared at the keyboard and then at my hands. This was the first time. The first time I started to question whether what I was doing was correct or not. Loop 73. Dang dang dang. It was the first time that I didn't make any mistakes. I played the piece without any mistakes. However, it was still far from perfect. The tempo wasn't perfect, and the notes sometimes were softer than intended, breaking the entire piece from what was deemed as perfect. I started to scratch the side of my neck. I need to practice more. I had long forgotten about time and my original mission. All I was thinking about was the keyboard in front of me. Dang. Loop 157. Clicking. I watched as the door clicked and locked. I stood up from my seat and reached for the keyboard. The same routine. The same notes. Dang, dang, dang. By now, I didn't even need to look at the keyboard to play the notes correctly. It was ingrained in my mind. And yet, the music was still far from perfect. It was still missing a lot. Anxiety started to gnaw at my chest. I didn't know how much time had passed, but it almost felt like forever. How much time did I have left before the trial? What would happen when the time came? Would I be able to clear it? The answer was obvious. At my current skills, it was impossible. Damn it, damn it. I clenched my teeth and focused on the keyboard in front of me. Again. Loop 244. Dang, dang, dang. Daya. Dong, dang. Ting. Ding. Do, 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 do. Dang. Dang, dang. Da. Loop 271. Bang. I tossed the keyboard towards the door. The keyboard shattered into pieces, but I wasn't done. I picked the keyboard again and tossed it at the door again, smacking it over and over again. I wanted to break the door. Why? Anger had started to consume my mind. I couldn't understand. Why was it that despite everything I was doing, something was missing? Bang! I tossed the keyboard again. The remaining pieces shattered on the door as I took deep and heavy breaths. It took a few moments for my mind to calm down. And when it did, a certain panel appeared in front of me. Seth Thorne, 98%. Do you wish to send Mr. Jingles? Play button yes, no. I paused the moment I stared at the panel. Before I knew it, I had reached a point where I could hypnotize myself. I looked around the room and settled my gaze on the remains of the keyboard. No, not this round. I stepped back and looked at the door. It had been 271 loops since I had started playing the keyboard. The entire time, nobody had come directly to my door. It became clear to me that something was off with the situation. Either the entity that kept me locked was preventing anyone from entering, or there was something else at play. In any case, it doesn't look like anyone can hear me from behind the door. I need to find a way to go out and play the keyboard. I walked towards the door and grabbed the handle. I pulled it down a couple of times and tried to push the door open. However, the door refused to budge under the weight of my grip. Giving up, I took a step back and enhanced my foot using trait transfer, coating my entire foot with a black film before kicking the door. Bang! The door budged, but it didn't break. I tried again. Bang, bang. It still refused to break. This is not a normal door. I can't break it. It was obvious to me that the door was different from the one in my office. It looked to be purposely designed so that it couldn't be broken through brute force. At the very least, this was what I believed, since I was certain the door would break on any normal occasion if I tried. Narrowing my eyes, I thought about trying again when Loop 272. The next loop began. I found myself standing in the middle of the room again. The keyboard was no longer broken and was sitting by the side of the room. Turning my attention towards it, I walked towards it and started to set it up. The panel appeared in front of me again. Seth Thorne, 98%. Do you wish to send Mr. Jingles? Play button yes, no. My finger hovered over the yes button, and I got myself ready to press it when I turned my eyes in the direction of the door. I suddenly realized something as I looked at it. The click that usually came at the start. Where was it? The date of the excursion has been moved up even further. Do you all think you're ready? The section chief spoke solemnly, his gaze fixed on the squad members standing before him. Each wore the distinct uniform of the guild, their presence filling the cramped room with a heavy tension that pressed down on everyone present. Sitting by the end of the table, Clara leaned back on her chair with her arms crossed, her fingers drumming over her arms. All eyes seemed to turn in her direction in that moment. She remained quiet, sitting with her face unchanged until she eventually turned her attention towards the section chief. You say that an abnormal energy shift was detected in the gate, correct? That if we don't go now, there might be a chance that the anomaly hidden within the gate might escape. The section chief forced a smile. The choice is entirely up to you. The scouting team that the Bureau has sent cannot be contacted at this moment. They're currently stuck within the gate. I wish I could tell you more, but everything that you know is all that I know. Clara remained seated in her seat while closing her eyes. She processed the entire situation in her mind. In short, the gate was showing abnormal changes. These changes weren't good. It indicated several things. The gate was unstable, and there was a high chance that the anomaly might escape the gate. This sort of occurrence wasn't rare. It tended to happen from time to time. The only issue was that this was a high-ranked gate. Allowing such a strong anomaly to escape would bring disastrous consequences to the world. There's still the issue that we're not fully ready to enter the gate. While we do have all the relevant information, it wouldn't be worth the risk, especially since the danger is relatively high. Clara's thoughts came dangerously close to downright rejecting the offer, but before she had the chance to do so, as if sensing her thoughts, one of her teammates spoke. We should accept the offer. She was a young-looking girl with twintails, Irene Keert. She followed a rather unique decree, which was called paranormal. It gave her the ability to foresee the future, albeit in small glimpses of it. Holding onto a card, she tossed it on the table. Ace of Pentacles. The room paused as Clara looked at Irene. Are you certain? Oh, yes. Clara took a deep breath before looking around. Eventually, pressing her hand against the desk, she stood up. Get ready, we'll depart in a few hours. The Ace of Pentacles signified new opportunities. It depicted a hand emerging from the clouds holding a shining coin above a fertile field. As Clara knew, the card represented a gift from the universe, a chance for prosperity success. Irene usually had an extremely high accuracy rate. The chances of her ever being wrong were extremely low. It was hence why the moment that she brought her card out, Clara didn't hesitate to take on the mission. If this was an opportunity, then they couldn't miss it. Stopping in the main area of the containment department, Clara's steps slowed as her gaze drifted toward a particular door. The small plaque fixed to it read. She lingered there for a moment, her eyes fixed on the sign before eventually moving towards the door. She stopped right before it, and right as she raised her hand to knock on the door opened by itself. A pair of dead eyes met her gaze. How can I help you? The eyes looked even more dead than the last time she had seen him. In fact, everything about him felt different. He looked inhuman. His face was pale, and his expression appeared to be completely devoid of any of the qualities that made one human. Clara's eyes narrowed at the sight. There's something really off about this guy. Her gaze lingered in his direction for the next few seconds. That was until she tore her gaze away and took out her phone. I'm about to leave on a mission. I'd like to schedule an appointment for when I come back. Do you think you'll be free? I should be. Seth replied slowly, his eyes and expression not changing once. Clara yet again took note of this before nodding and passing over her phone number. "Make sure to give me a call when you're free. I'm really interested in taking a session." "Oh, yes." Seth nodded, and Clara moved away. She heard the sound of the door closing not long after, as she licked the bottom part of her lips. The more I interact with him, the weirder he becomes in my eyes. It's a pity that I won't get to see him for a while. I should pay more attention to him once I get back. Clara left the department right after that, heading for the lobby where the others were waiting. They then proceeded to take the guild's private jet and flew towards the island of interest before arriving at the gate of interest. Including Clara, there were 5 members in total. This was the composition that Clara had decided to bring with her. She quickly summarized the situation to her team. "You all should have the information about the gate. I don't think I need to repeat myself regarding the operation. We've already gone through that before. I've also gone through the things that you should do in case the situation goes wrong or the gate rank increases." Following the incident a while back, Clara learned to be a lot more cautious and started to plan for anything that might go wrong. She made sure to go through all of that with the team 5 times on the plane. In the end, seeing everyone looking at her with the same nods and tired expressions, she turned her attention towards the gate. It was located inside an abandoned warehouse, and it hid right inside an inconspicuous white metal door. Agents of the Bureau stood by the side, alongside several personnel from the guild. "Ready." Clara checked her team one last time before nodding and taking out an hourglass. The others did the same. Her node activated, and she flipped the hourglass. Immediately, the granules within the hourglass slipped towards the other side. It took no longer than a minute for all the granules to flip. Her vision grew black moments after. By the time she regained her bearings, a sharp, metallic tang of rust filled her nostrils. As her eyes adjusted, she realized she was surrounded by old machinery, their broken frames and corroded gears standing around like twisted and creepy shadows. Clara took in the sight around her in silence. Then, she started to walk forward. Severed Star Guild First Squad. Excursion commenced. I paused what I was doing, pulling my hands away from the keyboard. Staring at the door, I hesitated for a moment. I didn't hear the click, did I? The click that usually comes every time that the loop restarts. The door. It was open. But why? Why did it suddenly open now of all times? Something didn't make sense. Frowning, I walked towards the door, feeling a certain tension settle over my chest as my entire body tensed. The closer I was to the door, the tenser I felt. It was as if whoever had been locking the door all this time had grown tired of waiting. It was now standing right outside the door, waiting patiently for me to leave. I pursed my lips, feeling the beat of my own heart increasing. In the end, however, clank, I still ended up opening the door, my hand holding onto the knife as I got ready to stab. And yet, nothing. The surroundings in front of me were pitch black, devoid of anything. I stepped out and looked to my left and right. Still nothing. I scratched the back of my head. What in the world was happening? Did it just forget to lock the door? I hesitated for a moment before tossing all thoughts to the side. There's no time to waste. Since the door is open, I might as well start. Heading back into the room, I picked up the keyboard and placed it outside. Bringing a stool with me, I sat down on the stool while adjusting the mask on my face. Then, basking in the silence, I pressed both my hands on the keyboard. Dang! The first note echoed. The rhythmic tap of her footsteps carried through the darkness. Clara's gaze remained sharp, fixed intently on the path ahead. So far, everything was unfolding, as the scout reports had stated. They were inside a worn-down warehouse. The surroundings were completely dark, and she could feel a lingering presence around, watching her every step and movement. Pausing, she took out a small walkie-talkie and tried to communicate with it. "Can anyone hear me?" She received no reply. Clara tried again. Second check. Yet again no reply. Clara came to an understanding of her current situation. It's just like last time. The walkie-talkies aren't working. She wasn't flustered. At least this time, it didn't seem like the gate had increased in rank. The only issue was that she couldn't locate her teammates. One step at a time. For now, I'll try to understand how the gate works. Clara looked around her surroundings once more. Her gaze lingered on the massive machinery looming around her, their twisted shapes coiling in the dark like silent giants. The silence pressed down on the air, each shadow carrying a quiet sense of foreboding, as though the presence she felt was waiting to strike at any given moment. Clara maintained her calm as she walked ahead. She summarized the situation in her mind. So far, the goal of the gate is to find the exit before the anomaly can find me. The issue is that there's no clear way to know where the exit is. But that's not all. Clara licked her lips. This is also supposed to be a rescue mission. 2 scout teams from the Bureau were stuck within the gate. She needed to locate them and escort them out. But with that being said, Clara didn't have a good feeling about the scouts. With time so heavily distorted within the gate, they had stayed inside far longer than previously anticipated. She feared that by now their minds were far from sound. In truth, it was more than likely they had already gone insane. It was for this reason that she needed to hurry. Clara picked up her steps while her eyes flickered with a cold glow. Her node started to churn. Almost at once, the darkness surrounding her began to thin, giving way to a creeping mist that trailed close behind. As it closed in, her body started to fade, slowly mixing in with the strange mist as her speed picked up. Clara was of the Sentinel Decree. The node she used was Veil of Shadows. It gave her the ability to turn her body corporeal and travel faster, while also moving past thin areas. She was the perfect person to scout the entire factory and find a way out. Her body sank deeper into the silence, the sensation growing stronger as her pace quickened, carrying her further into the factory. Clara roamed the place for the next dozen minutes, hopping to see something. And she soon did. Hello? Slipping past the machinery, her eyes darted through the shadows until something caught her attention in the distance. Behind one of the rusted hulks, a figure crouched low, clutching their head with both hands. Their bodies shook violently, as though completely terrified by something. Clara stopped, her figure slowly unveiling behind the mist as she appeared right before the figure. Heek! The moment she appeared, he flinched and screamed. No, 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 stay away, stay away. He huddled himself closer to the wall while looking at her. Heek! He looked completely traumatized and scared. Clara stared at the scene and frowned. Looking at his clothes, he must be a part of the scouting members who had joined at the very start. Given how much time must have passed, this is a normal reaction. Clara wasn't taken aback by the reaction. She had expected it and was also used to it. Taking a knee, she softened her voice. It's okay. I'm not an enemy. I'm on your side. I've been sent by the... Heek, stay away, stay away. Despite whatever words she said, the man in front of her continued to squeal. Clara pursed her lips while staring at him. He looks too far gone. She stood up and shook her head. Just as she turned her head away, trying to see if she could detect anyone, she heard a small whimper coming from the man before her. Please, please leave me alone. I told you everything. I said everything, please. Hello? Clara once again turned her attention towards the man before her. As she did, She heard him repeat the same mumbles as her brows furrowed, and she took a knee once more. Hey, hey. She shook his body once more, forcing a few whimpers from him. Hiek, please, leave me alone. Hey. Clara shouted this time. In that moment, for just a very brief moment, clarity returned to the man's eyes as he took notice of Clara. Clara took advantage of that moment of clarity to speak. Who are you talking about? Who forced you to say everything? Who? The man paused for a moment, his gaze flickering. And then, BL's asked, he mumbled, his eyes trembling more and more until finally, J Jester, a jest Hiek. He screamed once again, but this time, Clara didn't bother with the scream as her face changed, and she took a step back, her face growing numb. Jester. It couldn't be. Hallelujah. Another scream suddenly pierced across the factory. The moment Clara's gaze flicked in the direction of the noise, she found herself in a completely different area. Hug. She looked around her, towards the ground and up. It didn't take long for her to understand what had happened. Did the loop reset? She thought about the scream in the distance and closed her eyes. So it looks like the loop resets whenever someone inside the gate dies. Clara made a mental note in her mind. The calmness in her gaze slowly diminished as she thought back to the words coming from the scout she found. Jester. She took notice of the utter dread and terror in his voice as he spoke the words and took a deep breath. In the end, he's shown himself here as well. Thinking about all the previous experiences, her heart sank. If the jester were here, then... Dang. Hello? Hearing a certain tune in the air, Clara stopped. Her head slowly turned in the direction of the noise. Dang, dang. The notes were quiet. However, within the quietness of the surroundings, they felt loud. Clara felt her breath at the sound of the music. Something about it felt odd. It was such a beautiful yet haunting piece that seemed to draw her attention. Without even realizing it, Clara found herself walking in the direction of the noise. Step asterisk. Her footsteps echoed through the factory, each one drawing her closer to the source of the music. With every step, the melody grew clearer, and with clarity came an unsettling shift, the once faint tune twisting into something creepier. Her skin unknowingly rose. And then, she stopped. A figure appeared before her. He sat behind a keyboard, his back straight and movements smooth as his hands glided across the keyboard. The melody quickened, and the bells on his hands made a soft sound. Dang, dang, dang. The jester stood at the center of it all. He was all that Clara could see as he played the keyboard. And as he played another note, he paused. The surroundings turned quiet. His gaze slowly rose, and his eyes met with Clara. The two stared at each other in silence before the jester placed his finger against his temple. Bring everyone to me if you wish to escape. His voice was hoarse, yet chillingly clear, lingering in the air long after the words were spoken. Then, everything faded, and Clara found herself in a completely different place. Huap. I drew in a sharp gulp of air, as though I had been starved of it for far too long, the ceiling lights slowly sharpening back into view. My chest rose and fell with heavy, uneven breaths, while beads of sweat slid down my skin, soaking into the fabric of my shirt until it clung tightly to my back. It took several seconds for me to regain my bearings as I pressed my hand against my temple. Hopefully, I won't have to do that again. A lot of things started to make sense to me all of a sudden. Mainly, why the door was no longer locked. It looks like those from the first squad have arrived. This is a lot earlier than I previously predicted. Whatever entity was locking the door had most likely been scared of, or had gone to them. This seemed to be the best explanation. Either way, I had expected them to come much later than this. However, this was good. I was on the verge of going mad. Thinking back to the last moment I met Clara, when our eyes locked, I could still recall the suffocating pressure that gripped me while staring at her. For an instant, my body refused to move, frozen in place by the fear that she might suddenly lunge forward and tear away the mask. Thankfully, I was quick to react and killed myself before she had the chance to. Thinking about the pain and sensation, I pressed my hand against my stomach and almost felt the sudden urge to puke. It's been a while, I miss this feeling. The feeling was also accompanied by a subtle headache, one that nagged the back of my head, but wasn't exactly making it impossible for me to think properly. Right, it's about time I take my medicine. Rubbing my face, I walked towards my bag and took out my medicine. As I did, I grabbed a bottle of water and downed the medicine in one go. The headache subsided a little. However, there was still a lingering ache that I couldn't quite get rid of. Staring at the pills in front of me, I sighed. It looks like the effects are slowly starting to diminish. I had been noticing this more as I took the medicine. These weren't even the same pills that I bought in the shop at first. They were the better version that could only be found in the second-order shop. The fact that the effects were running out indicated that I had to quickly reach the third order before it was too late. I really don't have much time. There were so many things that I needed to do. In particular, my main focus at the moment was clearing the conductor trial. The entire reason why I had taken up this gate was precisely because of the conductor trial. The system never gave me a useless mission. It was always tied to something important. I hoped that by taking this gate, I'd be able to find the answer to clearing the quest, but so far, I had only made minimal improvements. I bit my lips while looking around the room and setting my gaze on the keyboard. It's not just the conductor that I need to take care of. I also need to learn more about the strange cult that seems to be somehow tied to the secrets behind my appearance in this world, and also my disease. Every step and action that I took was towards these goals. To become stronger and learn more about the truth, to find a cure for my disease. Slapping the side of my face, I shook myself out of my thoughts and walked towards the nearby keyboard. I then took a couple of deep breaths before putting on my mask. Just as I got ready to leave, however, I stopped. I turned back to look at my office and came to a realization. Right, I can't keep things like this. Now that Clara and the first squad were here, I couldn't allow them to see the room like this. While they hadn't entered my office, I knew Clara had caught a small glimpse of it. She would definitely notice something amiss. I scratched the back of my head while looking around. In the end, I did the only thing that I thought was fair to do. Bang! I started to destroy everything. Calling out the Dreamwalker, I had it help me destroy everything in the room. Myrle did protest about the painting, but I explained to her that it was just temporary. After that, I tossed everything outside the room, in an inconspicuous place, before setting up my keyboard right outside the door. I sat down on the stool and pressed my fingers over the keys. I didn't play right away. The darkness pressing in from all sides made it difficult to see clearly, and the silence carried an unsettling weight. Somewhere within it, I could feel a lingering stare fixed on me from the shadows. It was enough to make my skin crawl, but I remained focused. I held my phone next to me. At the same time, a notification appeared. Seth Thorne, 98%. Do you wish to send Mr. Jingles? Play button yes, no. I paused for a moment while staring at the notification. Although I didn't know what the results would bring, I knew that this was probably the last thing I could do before the end of the mission. I could feel it. This mission was about to reach its climax. For that, I knew the real struggles were about to begin. But I was ready for them. I couldn't wait for this hell to end. Closing my eyes and taking a deep breath, I opened them up again before raising my finger and pressing yes. Flick. My phone turned on, and a certain melody played in the air. Da-da-da. What followed was an all-too-familiar voice. "Mr. Jingle says Tilda. He's here." The moment Clara regained her bearings, the weight of the situation settled upon her. As her eyes darted around, the darkness enclosing her seemed to deepen, and the silence pressing against her ears grew all the more unbearable. She thought back to those last moments, to the haunting figure that she recalled back in her memories of that gate. A pit formed around her stomach as she looked around. In that moment, the weight of the invisible stare lingering across the warehouse seemed to intensify, and she felt control slipping from her grasp, little by little. There's a high chance that this might no longer be the same rank as the time that we entered. The gate. It could have possibly have increased to rank. Her breath sped up momentarily. Thankfully, she was quick to calm herself down. She had already experienced a shock like this in the past. She had trained herself to better deal with situations like this. The jester's words lingered in her mind once more. "Bring everyone to me if you wish to escape." Clara bit her lips. Based on the information that she had received and from what she had experienced, she felt that he was the key to clearing this scenario. But I can't trust it. What if this is a trap? No, what even is its goal? Clara felt a sharp sting at her lips. Before she realized it, she had been biting down so hard that a thin line of blood began to seep through. She quickly wiped it with her sleeve before looking towards the darkness. She could tell that the path had changed. However, within the quietness, just faintly, she could hear it. A hauntingly beautiful tune, da-dang. My body moved on its own. The sensation was different as opposed to the previous times. I was no longer in control of my body. I could see here and I was conscious. But when it came to the actual movements, dang, I wasn't the one doing the moving. Dang, dang, dang. The notes were sharp, and they rang loudly within the silence. The darkness that stretched in all directions pressed even more heavily as I played the tune, and in that moment, it suddenly felt as though a pair of eyes had firmly locked onto me. I felt a creeping dread, one that grew with each note that I played. And yet, I continued to play. I couldn't stop. Dang, dang. My movements were smooth. They were effortless, and most importantly, I wasn't making any mistakes. I had long memorized the sheet of music that I needed to play. Even without the hypnosis, I could play the tune, but things were different now. The pitch was perfect. The tempo was perfect. The posture and rhythm were also perfect. There were no flaws in my piece. The melody was haunting, yet beautiful. For a brief moment, it felt like I had finally cracked the code. But no, something is missing. It was hard to explain, but as my hands moved and my body played to the rhythm of the music, I felt it even more clearly. There was something that was clearly missing with the piece that I was playing. My heart sank. What is missing? This doesn't make sense. I'm playing in the most perfect way that I possibly can. How can there be something missing? Dang duh. As my fingers traced the keys and the melody spilled into the air, I slowly lifted my head toward the distance. From the reflection, I caught the faint outline of a presence, its body swallowed by shadow, only a pale mask gleaming through the darkness. My stomach flipped. That's... Step asterisk. The figure took a step forward. My entire body grew tense. And yet, dang, the movements continued. Bah thump, bah thump. They took another step. They drew closer to me. Their blank white mask became even clearer. And eventually, they stopped right before me. No, no, no. I stopped, freeing myself from the hypnosis as my hand pressed down, and I raised my other hand. Dang! But it was too late. Their hand raised, displaying a long, sharp knife. And spurred. Time reset. Huap. I woke up startled, clutching my chest as I took deep and heavy breaths, feeling the pain linger at the back of my mind for quite some time. Ha. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying my best to calm myself down. Wi. Taking a moment to process what had happened, I thought back to the time leading up to the final moments. I recalled how I had played and covered my face with both hands. It doesn't make sense, my piece was perfect. The notes, everything. There's nothing wrong with what I played, there should be nothing missing, so why is something missing? I clutched my hair so tightly that my scalp started to sting. Think. What was I missing? Why wasn't it perfect despite being perfect? Dang. Why? I paused for a moment. A certain note struck the back of my mind. Dang. A wrong note. And yet, it was the only thing I could recall about my play. Why? Why was that? I suddenly stood up. Bang! I threw the desk to the side and smacked everything onto the ground, breaking everything that I could see. The Dreamwalker came out right after, helping me shatter everything as I eventually walked out of the room and tossed everything to the side before setting up the keyboard like before. I put my mask on and sat down on the stool. The notification appeared as before. I didn't press it this time. Instead, I paused with my hands on the keyboard. Lifting my head, I looked at the clown who appeared before me. Make it so that I can gain back control whenever I want. The clown didn't say anything, but just nodded. I looked back at the keyboard and closed my eyes. I thought back at the piece of music. This was a piece that the conductor had created. It was a piece that grew in tempo with more time that passed, one that perfectly displayed the despair that came with perfection. The closer one came to it, the more despair they felt. I had reached perfection using Mr. Jingles. However, I was still missing something. In those last moments, right when the serial killer came, I realized what the thing I was missing was. Despair. Emotions. The thing that I was missing was the essence of the music. And so, I reached out and grabbed a certain lamp. Click. A pale blue glow appeared right after I turned it on. Steps appeared in all directions, and the surroundings turned colder. The weight of the hidden stair grew, and my heart pressed tightly against my chest. Despair. Mumbling the same things, Mr. Jingle's voice whispered into my head once more. My hands began to move on their own. Duh. I began to play the perfect piece again. The notes flowed smoothly, and no mistakes were made. I was flawless. I was perfect. And soon, a certain step appeared, and as I raised my head, a masked figure appeared in the distance. My heart pressed tightly against my chest. No. Fear started to claw at my mind. But at the same time, the effects of the hypnosis shattered. I regained full control of my body. But even though I regained control, I didn't stop playing. Dong. I started to make mistakes. Dong-duh. The closer the masked figure became, the more mistakes I started to make. Ding. Ding-dung. Tang-da-ding. The perfect piece had shattered. And soon, spurred, came my death. Huaka. I jolted awake, my head snapping up as my eyes frantically scanned the surroundings. I started to hyperventilate as sweat soaked my entire body, and my face paled to the point where I looked like a ghost. Recall. Standing up weakly, I forced myself to recall the last moments. The moments when the figure drew closer to me, the moment when the knife stabbed me, the moment when I started to despair. I recalled that sensation before and held onto my mouth. PF2. Despite my best attempts, the vomit still came out. Reaching for the nearby trash bin, I began to puke everything out. Urgh. A strong acid taste lingered in my mouth as I puked everything out. My mind blanked for a moment before I let go and forced myself up and reached for the keyboard. I walked to the door right after. The Dreamwalker appeared right after, shattering and destroying everything present. I put the mask on and pulled the door open, setting up the mask and starting again. The dim glow of the lamp appeared again. Dang. The serial killer came not long after. Dang dung. Tang da dang. I made even more mistakes this time. No, wait. Spurred. I died again. Urgh. I puked again. Spurred. I died again. Urgh. I puked again. Spurred. I died again. Urgh. I puked again. The cycle continued. I lost my sense of self. I just repeated the cycle over and over again, forcing myself to recall the constant sense of despair that I felt each time that I died, from the ways that I died to the pain that came with it. The number of loops reached quadruple digits. Each time the cycles would repeat. I'd die, I'd puke, and I'd force myself to play. My mind degraded. Madness started to take over. Play, 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 play. Dang, dang. As a result, my movements became more erratic. The semblance of order and perfection was gone. I was no longer perfect. I was playing shit. And yet, as I raised my head and stared at the audience that had unknowingly formed, in that moment, I saw it. My madness, my emotions, my despair, reflected right in their gazes. And that's when I realized, in my madness, I had reached perfection. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down.